Want to know what a real medieval tavern felt like? Forget the clean fantasy inn with polished beams and cheerful loots. Picture yourself pushing open a warped door into a low, murky room, where the air itself seems thick enough to chew. These weren't just places to grab a drink and swap a story, they were the beating, unruly heart of everyday life, where deals were made, gossip travelled faster than a courier, and half the town's problems began, and sometimes got solved before sunrise. The first assault is on your nose. It's an aggressive blend. Sweat from hard labour that no one had time or water to wash away, ale soaked into the wood for years, smoke from the hearth that refuses to leave, and a questionable undertone you can't quite name. The floor doesn't help. Rushes think straw mixed with herbs are spread across the planks to soak up spills, mud, and whatever the last patron couldn't keep down. They're changed when someone remembers. On busy nights, the floor literally squishes under your boots, like walking a marsh with a soundtrack. You'd better watch where you plant yourself, too. Tables aren't sleek slabs, they're rough boards balanced on trestles or barrels, ready to wobble if someone leans too hard. Stools are the classic three-legged kind that seem to tip on purpose, and benches dominate because they're sturdy, cheap, and easy to drag into a corner for a private chat. The room is dim by design. A few guttering tallow candles and rushlights throw a greasy glow that smears over faces and turns the far wall into a suggestion. That's not an accident. Bad lighting makes cloudy ale look clearer and suspicious stains harder to notice. It's loud constantly. There's no soothing background music to smooth the edges. You've got overlapping shouts, a merchant haggling with a carter, a pair of farmhands belting out a ballad that changes key every verse, and somewhere in the back, the telltale crack of a stool becoming a weapon. Everyone talks a little louder than necessary because everyone else does, and the volume stacks like firewood. If you want secrets, you lean close and cup your hand to an ear. If you want attention, you slam your mug and hope the server hears it through the roar. Architecture is simple, function first. Most taverns are one big room with a central hearth, a square of fire ringed by people, smoke climbing to a hole in the thatch or plank roof, and then deciding to hang around anyway. That smoke does more than choke. It preserves the strings of sausages and slabs of meat hanging from the rafters, and it keeps bugs off whatever herbs are tied up to dry. In larger towns, the better houses stretch to a second floor. Drinking and noise downstairs, sleep and more noise upstairs. Sleeping quarters is a generous phrase. Expect one shared room lined with straw mattresses, where travellers lie shoulder to shoulder, boots tucked under their heads to discourage borrowing. Furniture is built to survive the abuse. Tables on trestles can be lifted in seconds when the floor needs sweeping or when a scuffle clears space faster than any broom. Benches are common seating because you can pack bodies shoulder to shoulder, and stools unsteady as they are often belong to regulars or folks who agree to pay a sliver more for the privilege of not sharing a plank. If there's decor, it's a crude painting over the door, a bear, a crown, a bunch of grapes, something even the illiterate can recognize from down the lane. Windows, if any, are tiny and smeared with oiled paper or animal membrane that lets in a sour light and lets out none of the smell. What passes for a bar isn't a glossy counter. It's a plank laid on barrels or a half-barrel cut open, with casks racked behind it and wooden spigots hammered straight into the staves. No taps, no glass pipes, no golden handles, just gravity and a practiced hand. Storage is not hidden in a back room, it is the room. You see the wealth, or the lack stacked along the walls. Beer and wine casks shoulder to shoulder, sacks of grain slumped in corners, dried fish nets in coastal houses, herbs dangling like ribbons over the smoke, and in northern places, whole chains of sausage hardening above your head. A small barrel of spices near the serving plank is a flex. It says this keeper can afford to keep the good stuff where everyone can see it and keep an eye on it. Heat is both friend and enemy. The hearth throws a lazy warmth that never seems to reach your toes, but pack 50 people into a low room and suddenly winter doesn't matter. Bodies heat bodies, and for a few hours the space becomes one of the only truly warm places a labourer might find. That warmth deepens every aroma, for better or worse, and fogs the air until you can watch a door open by the way the smoke shivers. You'll cough, but you won't leave. Nobody does. Even the entrance tells a story. A pole juts from the wall, with a swinging sign, the Red Lion, the Black Bear, a gilded crown so travellers can spot it from the road. Names matter. Some suggest royal permission, some hint at the owner's trade, and all function like marketing before there was such a word. If you're hunting the place that serves decent drink and fewer bruises, you don't ask for directions so much as watch where the steady feet go at dusk and follow their noses. Regional quirks pop up, of course. In the north, a heavy stone hearth and low ceiling traps smoke like a blanket. Farther south, brick or tile chimneys siphon more of it away. You can actually see across the room and find your own hand. But less smoke doesn't mean pleasant. The core experience is stable across borders. Wood, fire, bodies, noise, and a constant negotiation with chaos. And for all that chaos, the room runs on recognizable rhythms. The server, often a young woman balancing more jugs than seems possible, threads through the crowd like a dancer who understands momentum better than any knight. The keeper does 3 jobs at once, tallying who owes what, cooling one argument with a joke, and heating another with a hard stare until it simmers down. A newcomer learns quickly where not to sit, which bench belongs to the men off the river, and which corner you leave to the card table, unless you want to leave lighter than you came. If you're imagining this like a stage set, remember the hazards are real. A spilled mug becomes a slick patch that claims ankles. A loose trestle leg makes a table dump its contents at exactly the wrong moment. That charming candle wedged into a wall crack drips tallow onto a sleeve, and the sleeve belongs to the loudest man in the room. The line between laughter and a brawl is a hair. You hear it snap sometimes, and then the furniture learns to fly. Yet for all the grime and the gawking, people come. They come because the tavern is where warmth collects in winter, where the news arrives faster than any proclamation, where work finds extra hands, where songs finish what the day started. They come because in a world without many third places, this is the third place. Neither home nor field nor workshop, but something communal and unpredictable. It's where a traveller meets a guildsman, where a priest pretends not to notice a familiar face over a jug, where a sailor's story buys his bread as surely as a coin. Peel back the dimness, and you can see why the room is built the way it is. Crude, movable, resilient. Everything inside can be shifted, scrubbed, or pretended to be, stacked, or sacrificed. The tavern is a machine designed to convert grain into drink, strangers into acquaintances, and long evenings into stories that will be retold with better punchlines and fewer teeth. You may gag once, blink twice, and squint always, but you'll stay longer than you planned. That's the secret no signboard has to spell out. So who actually packs into this haze every night? If you expect only mud-splattered peasants nursing sore backs and cheap ale, you're missing half the picture. The clientele is a collage, and that's what makes the room hum friction between trades, ranks, and tempers. Start with the labourers because they arrive first. The bellies of towns run on their hands, and those hands push the door at dusk out of habit. Field workers, carters, millers' boys, blacksmiths' apprentices, they slope toward the hearth like iron to a magnet. For some, the tavern isn't luxury, it's heat. Winter days end in fingers gone numb, and the only place where your bones loosen is this crowded room. Coins are scarce and travel quickly from palm to plank, and more than one household argument has begun because a week's comfort evaporated into froth. Yet the same faces show up tomorrow, because whatever else the ale does, it gentles the edge of a hard life for an hour. Then the merchants drift in, not always late, but always looking. If you picture contracts at a tidy counting table, reset that image with a wooden board and a grease stain. Deals are made here because everyone is here. A wool man meets a dyer, meets a shipper, and suddenly a shipment has legs. Not every town has a merchant tavern, but the pattern repeats. Some rooms become centres for certain trades, the way iron filings sketch a magnet's field. You can tell by the talk prices, waits, delays, and by the bags that never leave a man's lap. The keeper likes these customers. They tip in reliable coin and bring news that makes the rest of the room lean in. You will spot the church too. Not the bishop with a velvet hat, but the working clergy who live close to the people they tend. Parish priests, canons on errands, 1 or 2 monks who know the road better than the cloister. Is it hypocrisy for a man who earlier preached temperance to share a jug tonight? Medieval life is contradiction, and the church owns brew kettles as surely as it owns bells. The cleric in the corner might be negotiating parish repairs with a smith or humming a hymn that's acquired a few extra verses since it left the monastery. If a scold mutters about scandal, someone else will answer that good ale makes good neighbours, and good neighbours keep peace in a parish. Soldiers turn the room electric when they stride in. Men-at-arms with the swagger of pay in their pouch, mounted retainers wearing their lord's colours, even a night or two between campaigns or tournaments. Their presence can settle trouble, because no one wants to swing at a man who trains to swing for a living. Or it can light the fuse, especially when colours from rival households share a bench and the old quarrels blur into new insults. The stories lift the roof. Sieges that sound grander than they were, tournaments won by inches that stretch into yards after the second jug. You don't interrupt a soldier mid-boast unless you're eager to test the sturdiness of your teeth. Do nobles come? Sometimes. Young ones especially, sniffing out a taste of the real town away from the hall with its careful courtesy. They will keep to corners or private rooms if the house has them, and their coin opens doors no one else knows about. The room balances on a thin line. When a young lord drinks among common men, a joke can turn to offence in a heartbeat, but keepers who've lasted learn to shepherd the energy like a shepherd steering rams. Women are here, and not only behind the jugs. Serving women are the bloodstream of the place, threading through chaos with heavy pitchers and quick wits. They need a personality like a shield. Warm enough to encourage orders, firm enough to deflect wandering hands, sharp enough to remember who owes whom and who forgot last week. Some women own the very room you stand in, widows running what their husbands built, or masters in their own right, proof that a steady head can turn hops into livelihood. As patrons, women arrive in smaller numbers and different contexts. A brewer's wife checking her competition, a market woman sharing gossip after a profitable day, a traveller who would prefer to be invisible and rarely is. The room reads them and rearranges itself. Respectful spaces form where the keeper's eye is strongest. Travellers thicken the mix and stir the conversation. Pilgrims with badges pinned to their cloaks, peddlers whose packs hold miracles and junk in equal measure, messengers who ride hard and speak little, sailors who speak plenty and ride not at all, each brings a string of towns behind them. Ask about the road and you'll learn which bridge is out, which ferryman cheats, where a saint's fingerbone works cures, and where wolves have been bowled near the hedgerows. The tavern is an information exchange with a cover charge paid in drink. Authorities know this too. If a sheriff wants to hear what sailors whisper about a foreign fleet, or a bailiff wants the mood of the market, there's a corner where someone paid to listen is pretending to laugh at a joke. Taverns are practical as well as social. A barber surgeon might stake a spot near the light to pull a tooth or lance a boil on the spot, no waiting room. Only a mug for courage and a rag to bite. A scribe could sit with his inkhorn, writing a letter for someone who can speak their heart but not scratch it onto parchment. A matchmaker of sorts, or at least a fixer, hovers too, someone who knows who needs an apprentice, who's looking to sell a mule, who's hiring for a cart run at dawn. The economy of the town breathes in and out through this door. Watch the room long enough, and you'll see the social layers overlap in ways they won't on the street. The clerk who drafts letters for a wealthy merchant drinks next to the carter who carts the merchant's bales. The priest who will baptize the carter's child next week listens to the clerk's complaint about wages. A widow who owns the house takes payment from all three and remembers who treated her staff kindly. Reputation grows moss here, slow, obvious, hard to scrape off. A generous round can buy forgiveness. A cruel word can cost credit for months. Funerals stop here too. After the burial earth is tamped, the mourners trail in with that quiet shock that falls on a room like dust. For an hour, grief is a companion at the bench, more present than the drink. Then, as the candles shrink and the stories lengthen, sorrow shifts into laughter, not because the dead are forgotten, but because the living need to remember in a way they can carry home. It's raw, sometimes rowdy, and it looks like disrespect to an outsider. Inside the circle, it's how a village turns pain into memory sturdy enough to last the winter. If you listen for the tone beneath the noise, there's a pattern. Labour brings muscle and need. Trade brings money and news. Church brings conscience, and sometimes contradiction. Soldiers bring danger and glamour. Women bring order and humanity, and a reminder that public space never truly means male only, no matter what the loudest voices claim. Travellers bring horizon and rumour. The mix doesn't just entertain. It knits a community, however unevenly. It's also why the room is never neutral ground for long. A barked laugh from the soldier's table rubs the wrong way against a merchant's quiet negotiation. A cleric's raised eyebrow cools a joke at the next bench. A serving woman's sharp enough cuts through an argument that was just beginning to sharpen into something else. The keeper tracks all this in the corners of his eyes and moves a jug like a chess piece. a peace offering here, a stall tactic there. He knows who can sit together and who must be separated by 3 bodies and a bench back, and he enforces those borders with a smile until he has to use a stare. Why do they keep coming back despite the heat, the stink, the risk? Because this is where you're seen. Not just spotted, but witnessed your work, your troubles, your joke that landed, your song that didn't, your luck at dice, your misstep, your apology. The tavern remembers, and for most people in this world, being remembered by your neighbours is as close to immortality as you're likely to get. And speaking of memory, your stomach will remember what you eat here, if your courage can handle it. The room promises warmth and company. The kitchen delivers. Something. Step closer to the hearth and you'll find out how medieval tavern food earns its reputation and why seasoning sometimes seems like a duel rather than a garnish. Step through the haze toward the hearth and meet the true test of courage in a medieval tavern. The food. If you walk in hungry, lower your expectations and tighten your sense of humour. The menu is short, the pots are big, and the guiding principle is less recipe and more solution. The champion of the house is pottage, an endlessly simmering stew whose exact identity changes by the hour. Think of it as the community bulletin board of ingredients. Odds, ends, roots and scraps, all boiled into submission. A tavern that keeps a pot going for days is not cutting corners, it's running an engine. New vegetables get tossed in when someone arrives with a sack. A leftover bone goes in for strength. A handful of barley thickens the whole thing until your spoon stands up straight and salutes. The base is almost always grain barley or oats if the house caters to working purses. Wheat if there's money around. Then come whatever vegetables the season has blessed or cursed you with. Onions and leeks when they're cheap. Turnips and parsnips when the fields give generously. Cabbage whenever there's a reason to stretch a pot further. If you detect meat, congratulations and don't ask many questions. In a world without refrigeration, fresh is a narrow window, and edible is a broader, more forgiving one. Salting, smoking and pickling are the 3 saints of preservation, and all 3 leave a strong mark. Spices add a 4th layer, not the delicate dash you sprinkle on a weekend omelette, but a practical mask strong enough to arm wrestle yesterday's fish. Pepper, if the house can afford it. Mustard seed, a local favourite. A warming sprinkle of ginger or a brave pinch of cloves if a merchant's cart recently rattled by with something precious. Do people cut corners? People always cut corners. City ordinances banning suspicious meat exist because someone served suspicious meat. Pets do go missing. Rumours travel faster than carts. And a wise diner learns that sometimes the kindest choice is to appreciate the stew's heat rather than catalogue its flavours. You'll hear jokes about floor-to-table cuisine when a fallen scrap is rescued with speed and optimism. You'll laugh, then eat anyway. If pottage is the engine, meat pies are the portable version. These are less about pastry pleasure and more about packaging. The crust, the coffin, as people actually call it, can be thick as a plank and nearly as edible. It exists to hold the filling together and keep the gravy inside while you move plates across crowded benches. In a fine house, the crust might be decent. In a rough one, you hand it to the dog under the table or to the pig outside and keep the meaty core for yourself. What's inside is a gamble. Mutton if fortune smiles, beef on a festival, questionable bird on a Tuesday. The best houses season well and chop fine. The worst hide sins under sauce and courage. Bread plays a starring supporting role. Tavern loaves are heavy and dark, more brick than cloud. Fresh bread doesn't linger because it sells instantly. What you meet most often is yesterday's or last week's. Staleness isn't wasteful here, it's opportunity. Enter the trencher, a slab of stale bread that doubles as your plate. Your serving lands on it, the gravy soaks in, and by the end of the meal you decide if you're eating the plate too. Many do. Some trenchers, sogged to surrender, are gathered for the poor or for animals waiting outside. It's efficient, yes. It's also how the day's calories reach bellies that didn't have coins to enter. Medieval sustainability isn't a virtue-signalling slogan. It's survival math. Cheese shows up because it travels well and forgives rough handling. Hard cheeses can outlast a season and will challenge a knife before they challenge your nose. Quality ranges from pleasantly nutty to fit for shoe soles, as one complaint famously put it. Still, a wedge next to your mug is reliable protein, and reliability makes its own flavour. Eggs, when you can get them, are a safer bet still. If an egg is bad, you learn quickly and decisively. Fry it on the hearthstone with a swipe of fat, and you've got a meal that won't argue with you later. As for fruits and greens, they're mostly cooked into something. Raw produce is a concept viewed with a squint. Many believe fresh, uncooked stuff invites illness. So apples go into hot compotes, pears stew with a warm spice, and cabbage does what cabbage always does, holds the line in a stew. When gardens are generous, the pot looks hopeful. When snow says no, roots carry the weight. On better nights, a tavern flexes. A fisherman's luck becomes your plate. River trout charred fast and eaten faster. A hunter brings in a brace of birds and suddenly everyone smells rosemary because it's the one herb that says, "Today we tried." Imported delicacies creep in like rumours. A sprinkle of saffron if a merchant owes the keeper a favour. A daring drop of olive oil that makes half the room sniff the air like hounds. Portions stay modest. This is not an all-you-can-eat situation, but every now and then a bite surprises you. Those become the stories people tell in the fields next day. Portion sizes, by the way, aren't stingy by mistake. Most people eat 2 main meals in a day, and the tavern is for supplementing, not stuffing, unless you've come with coin to burn. Keepers also understand a truth every modern bar understands. Salt sells drink. A free bowl of salted nuts appears. That's not generosity, it's strategy. A crust painted with brine before the oven? You'll order another jug without thinking. Call it medieval niche marketing edible persuasion built into the plate. And you'll want that jug, because the real river running through the room is liquid. Water? Seldom offered. It's not that people hate it. It's that in many places it will hate you back. Untreated water carries all the invisible enemies of a town's drains and ditches. Brewing, however, boils and transforms. Ale turns risk into comfort. But let's not rush the cup. The cup will have its own chapter. For now, linger with the kitchen crew. Their job is alchemy under pressure. Heat, smoke, knives barely sharp enough, and a line of hungry faces judging every ladle. Burns happen. Tempers flare. A server rushes a plate too soon and a cook snaps back with a ladle in hand. Then a rhythm returns. Slice, stir, salt, serve. Creativity becomes the tavern's secret spice. A handful of ground mustard makes tired pork seem wide awake. A splash of vinegar rescues a fish on the edge. Breadcrumbs and fat become a topping crunchy, enough to make a humble turnip feel like a treat. The kitchen is where the tavern's reputation is born and tested daily. A keeper who invests in a decent pot, a steady supply of grain, and someone who can turn scraps into comfort, will survive lean months better than a rival with 3 flashy casks, and nothing to soak up the drink. Word spreads quietly but firmly about where the stew is honest and where the pies are dicey. Travellers carry those verdicts on their tongues to the next town. If you want to eat well here, you learn the unwritten rules. Be kind to the staff, and watch portions grow by a thumb's width. Return a bowl with a thanks, and your next trencher looks suspiciously fresher. Mock a server, and somehow your slice comes from the bottom of the pot where the flavours are concentrated. Regulars don't need a posted sign to understand. The economy of respect governs as surely as coin. So yes, medieval tavern food can be rough, salty, and mysterious. It can also be clever, surprisingly satisfying, and exactly what a cold night demands. You'll leave full enough to sleep and warm enough to walk home without cursing the wind. And as your spoon scrapes the last streak of gravy from the trencher, the inevitable question rises with the steam. What am I going to wash this down with? Take your seat. The casks are waiting, the spigots are ready, and the rules of the house written nowhere, enforced everywhere, are about to tilt your cup one way or another. Next, we drink. Slide your trencher away and reach for the reason half the town is here, the drink. In a medieval tavern, the casks against the wall aren't decoration. They're lifelines social, caloric, sometimes medical, occasionally spiritual. Start with ale, the everyday river. Forget the sparkling clarity of a modern pint. Medieval ale is cloudy, flat, and meant to be drunk young. It's brewed quickly from malted grain, often barley mashed, boiled, and fermented without hops in many regions for much of the period. The result is nourishing, low to moderate in alcohol, and full of body. It's also safer than water more often than not, because boiling knocks the teeth out of whatever nastiness the local ditch tried to slip into your bucket. Drink fresh isn't a marketing line here, it's survival advice. Ale turns in days. Keepers schedule brew days like bakers schedule bread, and regulars learn the house calendar the way we memorize happy hours. When a fresh batch is tapped, the room changes, pitch people linger, purses loosen. When the ale is old, the keeper's smile works twice as hard, and the spice jar gets suspiciously close to the ladle. Then there's beer specifically, hopped beer creeping in over the later medieval shoulder, especially from regions that nail the technique early. Hops don't just perfume, they preserve. Suddenly the window for drinkability widens, distribution stretches, and the economics of the cellar shift. A tavern that can source hopped beer might offer both: the homely comfort of house ale and the cleaner, longer-keeping beer from a brewer who stares at kettles for a living. Patrons notice. So do authorities, who love a product they can tax consistently. Other drinks orbit the casks depending on place and season. Wine appears where trade makes it flow plenty in the south, patchier as you move north, and always stratified by quality. You can buy something young and rough that argues with your tongue, or, if your purse has padding, something that travelled carefully and tastes like sunlight stored in wood. Mead honey wine shows up too, fragrant and costly wherever bees are plentiful and patience exists. Cider slides onto the menu in apple country, pear perry where orchards insist. In every case, what grows nearby writes the drinks list faster than fashion ever could. And water, let's talk about it honestly. People did drink it. Wells existed, springs existed. But in crowded towns where waste and water share too many handshakes, "I'll have water" is either an act of faith or desperation. You might get a cup drawn from a covered well with a decent reputation. You might get something that looks fine and ruins your next 3 days. Most keepers would rather sell you a smaller, cheaper ale than risk being known as the house that sends patrons to the privy for a week. The line between prudence and profit is thin and slippery. How is it served? Not with pint glasses etched with logos. Expect wooden mugs, leather jacks hardened with wax, hefty earthenware, and, in nicer places or richer hands, glass that sparkles like sorcery. Communal bowls still exist, especially for hot spiced drinks in winter, and strangers become less strange when their lips meet the same rim. The serving dance is practical. A spigot in the cask, a steady wrist, a short pour to test the clarity, a top-up that shows the server respects you or doesn't. Foam is technique, not showmanship. Spill some. Nobody minds the floors already telling its own wet story. Watering down? Of course it happens. Laws exist because humans cheat. Inspectors, ale tasters, ale conners receive the enviable job of sampling for quality and fairness. Their methods range from sensible sips to bizarre benches and sticky breeches in some tellings, but the point is consistent. If you sell dishonesty, you'll be shamed into honesty, fined into poverty, or strapped into a device that turns you into public entertainment for an afternoon. Does cheating stop? Not really. It just gets clever. A seasoned keeper learns to stretch a cask without stretching it too far, and a seasoned patron learns which nights to switch to cider. Strength varies. Most everyday ale isn't a knock-you-flat brew. People drink it like food. Small ale fuels children and labourers alike hydration with calories. Gentler than strong drink, but warming all the same. There are stronger versions for feast days, for soldiers with coin, for guilds that want to toast a new charter so loud the next street hears it. A clever keeper tiers the offering. Humble, honest, small ale for the masses. A better brew priced to tempt. A special cask saved for when a wealthy party arrives, because reputation travels fastest on elite tongues. Season flavours the cup. Winter invites hot wine cut with honey, cinnamon, and cloves if the spice chest allows drinker's cloak. Summer leans toward thin, brisk ale served fast, the kind you can put away before the next bucket of sweat hits your eyes. Harvest brings cloudy, yeasty mugs for workers gulping on their feet. If a brewer nearby experiments, you taste it roasted malt by accident, smoked grain by necessity, a batch that sat a day too long and needed rescuing with herbs. The room becomes an informal panel of critics without notebooks. Good, bad, another. Rituals grow wherever cups gather. Rounds become social contracts. You buy, I buy, she buys, they buy, miss your turn, and watch your stock drop faster than a spilled mug. Toasts seal promises, soften apologies, and crown stories. Clink if you have glass, bump if you don't, raise if you have neither. The habit of catching a friend's eye before you drink is more than courtesy. In a world that still whispers about poison and treachery, it says, I see you. I trust you. Let's live through tonight together. The bar tab exists. Surprisingly modern, surprisingly messy. Tally sticks split-notched paired turn memory into wood. The keeper keeps one half, you keep the other, and every mug carves another debt you will pay next market day. Credit is reputation spelled in drink. Fail it and your seat disappears. Honor it, and the house becomes a second home. Collateral piles up behind the plank. A cloak, a knife, a tool, a ring. On festival weeks, the shelf looks like a travelling merchant's stall of regrets. Not every drinker approaches the cask the same. The carter who spent the day under a load nurses a single mug like a campfire. The merchant checks the colour against a scrap of parchment near the candle and pretends he isn't. The soldier drinks as if speed itself were evidence of courage. The priest chooses a modest cup and a loud laugh, because laughter is easier to justify than indulgence. The serving woman knows all of this and adjusts pause the way a musician adjusts tempo, subtle, constant, nearly invisible unless you're looking. And watch what drink does to the room's edges. It sands them, mostly. Two men who wouldn't nod on the street share a bench and a joke after the second round. A quarrel that might have sparked in cold air melts into a song no one knows all the words to. But liquor also sharpens certain corners. The bench that felt like a family 10 minutes ago becomes a tribunal when someone boasts too hard or insults the wrong craft. Keepers keep a weather eye. The best can feel a brawl coming like a storm shift, how the laughter turns brittle, how a man sets his mug down a little too carefully. A quiet word, a jug redirected, a door opened for air. All techniques in the manual no one wrote. Every tavern learns its signature drink, the way a storyteller finds a voice. Maybe it's the house ale with a hint of smoke from malt dried over peat. Maybe it's the winter wine mulled until the windows sweat. Maybe it's the crisp cider that tastes like the orchard owner's pride. Patrons return for that, and for how the cup makes the room feel like the right size. Big enough to hold a town's noise, small enough to hear your friend's answer. So your mug's warm in your hand, the cask's heartbeat keeps time, and you're finally relaxed enough to notice the corner games, the dice that clatter like hail, the board that looks suspiciously like backgammon, but goes by another name. Because after the belly and before the brawl comes the part that brings everyone back, even when the stew disappoints, the entertainment. After the belly is lined and the mug is steady, the room tilts toward its favourite pastime, making the night shorter than it has any right to be. Entertainment in a medieval tavern isn't scheduled, it erupts. It begins in corners and spreads like a rumour until half the room leans in. If money changes hands, and it will, the excitement doubles. If singing starts, and it will, the rafters learn the chorus. Gambling is the easiest spark, because all you need is a table and nerve. Dice are kings of the corner, two little bones that command whole evenings. Hazard ancestor to a dozen modern games rules many benches. The rules vary by town and by whoever is winning, but the rhythm is always the same. Rattle, hush, clatter, cheer, or groan. Men swear the dice hate them. The dice swear nothing at all, and the keeper pretends not to watch, even though he knows the sound of a cask's worth of coin flying across a table when he hears it. Loaded dice exist. Of course they do. Every dig in every old street seems to cough up a pair with shaved corners or drilled weights. Sharp-eyed regulars test new dice on a flat board and trust the ones with familiar nicks and stains, like greeting old enemies. If dice are a drumbeat, board games are chamber music. Tables, an early form of backgammon, draws patient tacticians, while chess attracts the serious faces who talk quietly and smile rarely. There's money there too, in small stacks and side wagers. A skilled player can drink for free on most nights by luring optimists into just one game. The house enjoys these matches because they anchor the room. When a brawl threatens to bloom by the hearth, the murmuring intensity around a chessboard reminds people that not every victory requires a bruise. But the room's favourite contests don't always sit down. Impromptu challenges bloom out of boredom and pride. Who can hold a full pitcher at arm's length longest? Who can lift a small cask to the lip without spilling? Who can drain a mug fastest and still walk a straight line? The wagers swirl as quickly as the boasts. Someone produces a rope for a tug. Someone else lays coins on the board and declares the loser buys the winner's bench around. Strength talks loud, endurance whispers, and wins. Music loosens every hinge. A wandering minstrel earns a corner near the heat, and the strings, once tuned, thin the room's rough edges. He sings what people want, a fragment of a romance, a local scandal dressed as a fable, a battle ballad whose facts improve with each chorus. In towns that can afford it, a tavern might retain a musician fiddle on market nights, pipe on holy day eves, drum when the soldiers come through and want something with a march in it. On the best nights, the room sings itself. Call and response tunes where the chorus lands heavy and united, a noise that makes even the shy raise their voice, because no one can pick out a single singer when the whole room is the instrument. Then there are the storytellers, professional or talented amateurs, who can hush a crowd without lifting more than a hand. A good tale needs a hook quick as a fish bite. A merchant's son stole a saint's toe and learned why saints kick back, and then it needs breath. The teller paces the pauses like a dancer does steps. Laughter here, hush there, reveal after the sip. News arrives folded into fiction. The road beyond the mill is flooded. A taxman was seen at the east gate. A holy woman cured a baker's child. The keeper loves a storyteller. Stories sell time and time sells drink. Dancing happens like weather. No one announces it. The right rhythm collides with the right mood and feet answer. This isn't the plotted elegance of a noble hall. It's a shared pulse, clapping, stomping, turning, laughter pushed into motion. The church frowns when it can, condemns certain steps by name and gesture, which only makes those steps more popular. You won't see delicate handkerchiefs and measured bows. You'll see skirts flaring near the fire, boots thumping planks that protest, and couples improvising paths through benches like streams around stones. Companionship, too, is part of the evening's menu, though it lives in the grey space the law draws and life smudges. Some houses employ women who pour more than drink conversation for the lonely, warmth for the traveller who hasn't heard his name, said kindly in a week, closeness for coin, when both parties understand the rules. The authorities tolerate so long as the noise stays inside and the problems don't spill into the street. A wise keeper protects his staff like a captain watches his crew. Reputation keeps a tavern alive longer than any cask. With drink and wagers and dancing stacked together, fights are not an if, only a when. The vocabulary of violence is furniture. A bench swung like a battering ram, a stool broken into a makeshift club, a mug used as punctuation at the end of a sentence no one should have started. Real blades and bows are supposed to wait at the door. Weapons bans are among the few rules most towns actually enforce. That doesn't keep a knife from appearing now and then, but it does lower the lethality of tempers. The keepers who last learned to catch the trouble at the inhale, not the punch one hand on a shoulder, one word that stings and saves face. One ruffian hired to relocate a man whose night has reached its natural conclusion. Rules exist, even if they aren't written on the wall. Curfews snap the fun shut with a bell from the church or a horn from the watch. In some places, the keeper dims candles one by one to suggest that laughter goes outside or home. Price controls and ale tasters hover at the edges of every evening. No one wants the fine that comes with a watered cask proven in public. Licensing signs swing above doors, bushels and stakes that say, "This house is permitted." But unlicensed rooms still bloom in alleys like mushrooms after rain, where the music is louder and the credit is cruel. Still, for most nights in most houses, joy outweighs bruises. The tavern sands down the hard parts of a life spent in weather and work. A labourer who sang beside his worst rival yesterday will share a bench tomorrow when a travelling teller starts a story about a king who learned humility the hard way. A merchant who lost a handful of coins at dice earns them back in information he couldn't have bought sober. A soldier forgets what his shoulder remembers every rainy morning. A serving woman, feet aching, still smiles at the girl who pressed a secret coin into her palm with a whispered thank you for looking out for her mother. Watch the rituals that glue it all together. The round that circles a bench and returns to its start without faltering tells you this group will carry each other through a bad season. The toast that draws every eye to meet another's before they drink says trust is a currency here, and it's being spent wisely. The tally stick with new notches carved in careful, matching pairs says tomorrow exists and the next market day, and that both house and patron plan to meet them. When the music finally ebbs and the last wager is settled, a hush slides into the spaces between the rafters. Candles gutter. The floor crunches under new rushes that will be old by morning. The keeper rubs a thumb over the cask spigot to make sure it's tight, counts the collateral lined up behind the plank, and nods to the ruffian posted by the door. The room exhales. Somewhere outside, the curfew bell insists the night belongs to quiet. Inside, the memory of noise warms the dark. Tomorrow, it all starts again. But before the next evening can spill into song and dice and dancing, the sun has to climb, the laws have to reassert themselves, and the keeper has to survive the practical headaches, curfews, price tests, weapon checks, and a dozen regulations that look tidy on parchment and turn slippery in practice. If the tavern is chaos by night, it is calculations by day. Next, we pull back the door at midday and meet the rules that try sometimes to tame the room. Open the door at midday, and you'll find a different animal than the nighttime beast. Sunlight crawls across sticky planks, the smoke hangs lower and slower, and the keeper is doing math with his eyes. This is the shift when parchment rules try to sit on living wood. Medieval towns loved laws about taverns their councils couldn't help themselves. Too much noise, too much risk, too much temptation, too much opportunity. So they wrote curfews, price caps, weapon bans, and licensing schemes, then sent officials to enforce them with a mix of seriousness and theatre. Start with the curfew, the simplest lever. In many places, the church bell or town horn tells the room, firmly, that playtime is over. Summer and winter times differ, and the theory is tidy. At the bell, candles snuff, doors latch, streets clear. Reality is less tidy. A good keeper reads the neighbourhood. If the watch is strict, he pinches each flame himself and herds the last lingerers outside with a half-joking shove. If the watch is lazy or friendly, the room shrinks. Candles moved closer to the floor, laughter turned down, the door left on its latch so a tap on the plank can warn of approaching boots. Everyone claims to love order until it interferes with their song. Drink limits exist on parchment like moral geometry problems. Decrees announce that no person shall be served more than a penny's worth at once, or that so-and-so quantity is the maximum for an evening. The town feels virtuous. The tavern learns a new form of arithmetic. Patrons obey by walking 20 steps to the next door. Parties split so one person buys for 4, then 4 buy for 1. A clerk drafts a clever verse mocking the rule and sings it to the tune everyone knows. In the end, drink finds its level, and most officials discover they prefer rules that can be inspected with a nose and a tongue, which brings us to price controls. Ale and wine are essential enough that towns try to fix prices and, more importantly, test quality. Enter the ale conner, or ale taster, part inspector, part performance artist. He visits with authority in a public audience, knowing his job is to keep sellers honest and make buyers feel someone's minding the cellar. Sometimes the method is straightforward: pour, sniff, taste, judge. Sometimes tradition adds spectacle: benches, breeches, stickiness. A ludic ritual that hangs in memory even if it's more legend than daily procedure. The point is public trust. If the ale is watered or too sugary, a sign of cutting corners, fines follow, and the conner makes a show of fairness so the crowd believes the coins went to justice rather than a private purse. Does this end cheating? Of course not. It creates a dance. The keeper stretches a barrel without snapping it, seasons a tired cask with a little spice on festival nights, and saves the best for when the conner's likely to pass by. Patrons learn the calendar fresh brew on Wednesdays, inspections after market, the rough stuff toward week's end when carts ran late. Weapons bans are one area where enforcement bites harder. Towns know the difference between a broken stool and a blood feud. Doors gain hooks and shelves where swords, long knives, and bows wait for their owners. The more orderly houses keep a chalked rack, so returns match receipts. Men grumble as they unbuckle, but most comply because they've seen rooms ruined by a single bad blade. Does a knife still gleam from under a cloak now and then? Yes. Does the ruffian the tavern's hired strong-arm spot the gleam and remove the owner before the song changes key? If he's worth his wages, he does. Licensing turns doorways into billboards. In many towns, a pole with a brush or a stake with a symbol announces permission. Ale sold here, legally. The sign doubles as advertising. Even the illiterate read it. Unlicensed private rooms sprout anyway, especially in back lanes where the music is loud and the credit is sharp-toothed. Authorities raid when it suits them, after a fight that spills onto the street, or when a licensed neighbour complains loudly enough. Fines land, doors close. Doors reopen under a cousin's name. The ecosystem adapts. Punishments love publicity. The logic is simple. Make an example of the behaviour in the same public square that behaviour grew in. A keeper caught repeatedly watering ale may find his cask staved in front of the door while the crowd cheers and winces at the waste. Habitual brawlers taste the stocks or the pillory, where a town's rotten produce performs civic theatre. Some places add a special humiliation for drunks, the drunkard's cloak, a heavy barrel with holes for head and arms, paraded through streets to cure a man of his thirst by making him the day's joke. These rituals work not because they're cruel, but because they're visible. Inside the room, the keeper maintains a parallel justice system. Quiet, flexible, immediate. He can ban a patron for a week or a season with nothing more than a word and a finger tap on the plank. He can raise prices for a wealthy braggart who deserves to learn humility by arithmetic. He can slide a stronger drink to the man whose grief needs softening, and a weaker drink to the one whose temper needs it. He mediates disputes. You owe him 2 farthings for those eggs you broke when you swung the bench, and you'll scrub the hearth after close. And because his authority is local and lived in, people accept the verdict. The bailiff may hold the seal, the keeper holds the room. The daytime also exposes the business mechanics the night disguises. A chalk tally on a support post. A bundle of tallies sticks behind the plank, each with notches that match the half in some patron's purse. A shelf lined with collateral, a cloak clasp, a carpenter's square, a knife with initials cut into the horn. These are not decorations, they're IOUs in 3 dimensions. Town rules might define how long an item can be held before it's forfeit, but custom rules what actually happens if the owner's mother comes with tears, if a neighbour vouches with a nod, if a man has done 3 favours for the house in 5 months. Credit runs on reputation, not contracts. That's why insults matter. A cheap shot isn't only unkind, it lowers your credit limit. Inspections don't stop at drink. Some towns add kitchen checks. No corrupt meat, no offal kept past reason, no human waste near where people eat. By modern standards, the bar is on the floorboards, but for the time it's progress. Floors start to be scrubbed weekly because a regulation says so, and because customers learn to prefer houses where their boots don't pull free with a sound no one wants to describe. The shift from rush-covered planks to bare boards in some places isn't style, it's hygiene made enforceable. Every rule spawns a workaround, and every workaround teaches the rule writer a lesson. Close by curfew? Then the house reopens at first light to sell breakfast ale, to work gangs heading out of the gate. Limit drink per person? Then the bench becomes a person, and the bench buys the round. Ban dice on holy days? The game pieces vanish, and the betting moves to who can balance a spoon on a nose longest, which, inconveniently for the watch, isn't technically illegal. The dance never stops. If you want to understand how a tavern survives, watch how the keeper respects the spirit of the law while negotiating the letter. He enforces weapons checks because knives ruin profits. He keeps inspectors sweet without selling his soul. He nudges closing time rather than defying it, because a brawl at 2 bells past curfew will cost him more than the extra 6 jugs he sold. He forgives a debt when the debtor's misfortune is public and undeserved, and calls one in when a man's pride needs shrinking. It's governance at human scale, messy and effective. All this structure doesn't strangle the fun. It frames it. People can relax because someone is minding the edges. The round buying works because a tab exists. The songs soar because blades are on the wall. Prices stay within reach because a conner might appear tomorrow, and the keeper would rather sleep than argue. When law and custom meet in the middle of a room like this, the result isn't perfection, it's resilience. Of course, resilience doesn't pay the miller or the brewer by itself. The house has to turn noise into coin, and coin is only part of the story. In a world where silver is scarce and needs are constant, people invent other ways to settle what they owe. Step closer to the plank, and you'll see how medieval credit really works. Barter, tallies, collateral, rounds, and reputation woven into a payment system as intricate as any banker's ledger, written on wood and memory. Next, we open the keeper's drawer and count debts that don't fit into a purse. Lean against the plank at noon and you'll hear the tavern's real music. Not singing, not dice, but the soft arithmetic of survival. Coins exist. Yes, silver pennies, clipped, worn, occasionally bright, but they're fussy creatures. The average labourer's purse holds more air than metal. And even merchants prefer to keep their silver moving in trade, rather than letting it puddle in cups. So the tavern invents ways to turn thirst into ledgers, ledgers into trust, and trust back into thirst. Cash is only one instrument in an orchestra that includes barter, tally, collateral, and the oldest currency of all reputation. Barter lands first because it's honest and visible. A carpenter leans a mended trestle against the wall and drinks on it for a week. A blacksmith brings a bundle of freshly sharpened knives and collects his ale in installments, blade by blade. A weaver offers a pair of sturdy gloves that will keep the server's hands from tallow burns, and in return her bench drinks warm through the cold snap. Eggs, onions, a brace of eels, a sack of oat groats, a loaf of yesterday's bread traded at a fair rate. The tavern becomes a little market, its shelves a ledger written in objects. The keeper isn't sentimental about it. He has a mental exchange rate for everything. One egg might be half a mug. A well-made stool could be 2 strong jugs, or 3 of the small ale, and a promise to carry the cask in on delivery day. He adjusts by season. The value of fresh greens soars in late winter, plummets at harvest and by need. A broken hinge is suddenly worth more than a handful of coins, because coins can't keep the door from falling. Then there are tally sticks, the medieval credit card you can't lose without shame trailing behind you. Take a stout piece of wood hazel if you're lucky, willow if you're not, scratch the patron's name, and notch it for each drink or meal. Split it lengthwise, 1/2 for the house, 1/2 for the debtor. The genius isn't the notches, it's the split. The grain of the wood matches only its mate, so cheating requires carpentry and nerve. When market day comes or wages are paid, the halves kiss again, the notches add, and coin clinks onto the plank. The keeper saves the empties as trophies trust-honoured, debt closed. The ones that hang around too long migrate to a darker shelf where only he reaches. He knows which sticks are slow pay and which are never pay, but hope is a flavour taverns keep stocked. People have a way of surprising you on feast days. Collateral forms a second, quieter shelf, a pawn shop with stew. A cloak clasp with an enamel saint winks behind the bar, waiting for its owner to sober into responsibility. A mason's square, its edges nicked from years of truing stone, sits beside a ring whose sentiment outweighed its metal until last night. A knife with a carved heart on the handle promises its return by the time the next ship is loaded. The prices here are moral, not market. The keeper will demand more from the swaggering dandy who tossed his belt knife like a joke, and less from the widow who parted with her husband's cap pin to warm her brother after the burial. He's not a saint, he's running a house. But he knows the difference between misfortune and folly, and he prices accordingly. Credit built on reputation is the tavern's invisible scaffolding. Regulars drink on sight. Their debt is as good as their name. Miss a payment, and you don't just lose your seat, you lose the little graces that make a long winter bearable. The pour arrives shorter. The server forgets your bench on a busy night. Your turn in the round arrives faster than seems fair. Reputation fixes prices too. A merchant with a fine cloak pays a little more for the same mug as the miller's boy with flour in his hair. Is it gouging or a sliding scale that keeps a public room public? Depends on who's telling the story. The keeper calls it balance. Those with deeper purses subsidize the warmth that keeps a town kinder. Rounds are social credit with foam on top. A group buys in a circle, each person's turn a little test wrapped in cheer. Fail your turn, and the room doesn't shout. It remembers. You'll feel it next week when a joke lands flat and no one props it up. You'll feel it when your name floats to the top of the collateral shelf, even though someone else owes more. Keeping the round alive isn't just generosity, it's a commitment to belonging. Outsiders rarely get to play until they've earned the room's patience. Travellers prepay, coin on plank, jug in hand, and no offence taken. Locals can drink on the layaway of goodwill, and everyone knows who is which without a sign. Not all debts stay friendly. The wall of shame exists in every town by some other name. A small display of items never redeemed. A child's shoes, a fine comb, a tooled belt, each with a chalked monogram that has faded more slowly than the owner's promise. The display isn't cruelty, it's education. It whispers, pay when you can, speak when you can't, and don't ask the house to carry you forever. When persuasion fails, collection takes form in ritual rather than force. A keeper might stroll the market with the tally half jutting from his cap, a polite flag that tells the debtor he's being seen from across the stalls. Or he sends a server with a friendly errand and a firmer message. Violence is bad business. So is letting debts rot. Between those poles, 100 soft tactics keep the beam balanced. Prepayment has its own etiquette. Strangers with coin on the counter get a slightly heavier paw and a watchful kindness. No one wants a traveller's story of stinginess reaching the next town. But strangers who haggle too hard might find themselves seated under the leaky bit of roof or near the door that never quite shuts in winter. Locals who pay ahead say, a mason who comes flush after a wall-building contract can strike a deal. A discounted cask reserved for his crew on Fridays. Their bench saved, their jugs marked with a nick. The house likes these agreements. Predictability is worth a shaved margin. Inventive payments flourish during shortages. After a hard harvest, a gang of ditchers might offer a day's labour to cart fresh rushes, scrub the floorboards, and split firewood in exchange for stew and small ale. During a fish glut, the room smells like the river, and the credit ledger like scales. The keeper salts and hangs what won't sell today, paying in drinks that cost him less than coin. When snow seals the roads and merchants vanish, the tavern leans into village economy mending, swapping, cooking, lending. In those weeks, the ledger records favours as much as sums. Come spring, the numbers catch up. Cheating exists, as it does in any system built on trust. A man might shave a notch off his tally half and claim the night was tamer than it was. A traveller might skip town at dawn and leave a ring that turns out to be brass with ambition. A colluding pair might try to pass a forged tally, clever with knife and glue. But taverns breed detectives. The server remembers who drank the third round. The ruffian notices the ring's weight before it hits the shelf. The keeper reads wood grain like a midwife reads signs and smiles when the forgery splits all wrong. The cost of getting caught isn't just repayment. It's exile from the room that keeps a body warm in February. Sometimes charity moves through the same channels as credit. A poor man's stick leans behind the bar, anonymous notches paid by patrons who ask the keeper to feed whoever comes in cold and honest. A guild might fund a winter barrel, small ale poured free for those who show their token members mothers, aging hands, apprentices between masters. A widow's ledger goes clean after a funeral because 5 men who never agree on anything agree that they do tonight. These aren't promises made aloud. They're the quiet overhead of living close together. All of this barter, tally, collateral, rounds, sliding prices, charity tabs, turns the tavern into a bank with a hearth. Not a bank that hoards coin, but one that circulates favours, resources, and mercy in loops tight enough to hold a town together. It's easy to sneer from a distance at the informality. It's harder up close, where a mended hinge keeps a door from freezing open, where a cloak clasp ransomed on Saturday warms a child on Sunday, where a tally split fairly keeps 2 men honest who might otherwise be enemies. Of course, for every debt neatly settled, there's one that sours. What then? The keeper can ban the debtor, sure, but exiles are costly. Bitter men make trouble in alleys. Better to engineer a graceful exit. Let the debtor work it off hauling casks, chopping kindling, scrubbing pots until his pride is slick as the floor. If he shows up and sweats, the room forgives at a pace set by the rhythm of his labour. If he doesn't, the shelf keeps his knife until someone else recognizes the carving and buys it to settle a smaller favour, and the story that follows his name will keep him thirsty wherever he goes. By dusk, the arithmetic has been done with knives and nods. The eggs have turned into ale, the tally sticks into promises, the promises into songs waiting in the rafters. Night will claim the room again and cover the ledger with laughter, but the math will still be there under the music, holding everything up. And holding things up is the keeper's real craft, especially when his own crew is as likely to catch a bruise as a tip. Next, we step behind the plank for a full shift and meet the people who keep the machinery running. The keeper with a diplomat's stare, the servers with steel wrists and quick memories, and the cooks who perform smoky miracles with tired knives and good timing. Step behind the plank and the tavern changes scale. From the floor it feels like a tide. From here you see the currents, the crosswinds, the rocks you must steer around a dozen times a night. The house runs on 4 pillars. The keeper who thinks 3 moves ahead, the servers who move like water under pressure, the cooks who turn scraps into comfort, and the ruffian call him guard, doorman, peace broker, who keeps the peace with hands instead of parchment. Together they perform a nightly miracle. Take a town's frictions, salt them, boil them, and serve them without letting the pot crack. The keeper is part accountant, part mayor, part weather reader. He stands where he can see the door and the hearth in a single glance, eyes flicking like abacus beads. He's counting more than coins. who arrived tight with anger, who loosened after the first mug, which bench is a storm front if seated wrong. He tracks credit without ledger, reputation without minutes. A regular tips his cup at an angle the keeper recognizes low coin, high worry, and the poor adjusts to mercy. A cocky traveller leans too hard on a joke, and the price of his next round floats up a farthing on principle. It's not cruelty, it's calibration, like tuning a lute until the room hums instead of screeches. He has signals too, a private semaphore with his staff. A touch to the ear means thin the paw for that man. He's already unsteady and tomorrow's market needs him upright. A tug at the sleeve means strengthen the next jug at that bench. A reconciliation is underway and bravery helps fragile promises hold. 2 knuckles on the plank is caution. Watch the soldier in green. His stories are turning sharp. The servers read these signs in the blur of motion, because they've learned to see with their skin as much as their eyes. Servers, most often young women, sometimes boys smart enough to learn quick, carry the room's memory and its grace. Their wrists are strong from hauling earthenware and leather jacks full of ale through bodies that don't yield unless you make them. They remember who paid, who owes who. Paid last time, I swear. They remember that the miller likes his mug cool from the yard in summer, that the priest pretends to refuse the 3rd round and always accepts if you say, "For the poor box," that the carter won't take a seat unless you point at a spot and say his name first. They shepherd drunks back to laughter and steer hands off their waist with a look that says, "We are at work, not a harvest dance." They walk a narrow social ridge, friendly enough to make coin move, distant enough to survive the night with dignity intact. A crude word earns a colder paw or an empty bench the next evening. Persistent offenders discover that ale from the dregs has a particular taste, and pies from the bottom of the stack have a particular toughness. This is the staff's quiet justice. No brawl, no scene, just tiny weather changes that make a bully feel like the wind turned against him. And when the insult cuts too deep for cleverness, the ruffian appears like a door swung shut. The ruffian is not simply muscle, he's timing. He knows when a hand on a shoulder will turn a storm, and when a forearm across a chest is the only language a man understands after his 6th cup. He collects blades at the door and hangs them high, tallying them like a priest tallies souls. He watches corners with the gambler's eye and plants himself near whatever table has the most men pretending not to be angry. He prefers to move a man outside with a joke and a grip like iron. If he must, he moves too. He takes his bruises quietly, and the house honours them with coin, with care, and with the understanding that if he says a patron is done, that patron is done. In the kitchen, the air is another country, thicker, hotter, loud with pans whose bottoms have more history than polish. Knives are sharpened on the same stone as the mason's chisel when the cook can borrow it. A woman with forearms like planks mans the pot. A boy with quicker feet than sense dodges between hearth and hatch. A second pair of hands kneads dough that will be soup's sturdy friend by nightfall. The work has rhythms. Early chopping, mid-evening feeding, late salvage. Spices live in a small chest with a stubborn lock. The key stays on the keeper's cord. Salt is coin. Pepper is brag. Mustard is salvation for meat that saw one dawn too many. Cooks are judged without mercy by people who don't understand the math of scarcity. Still, they find ways to delight. Bread toasted over the coals and rubbed with a clove of garlic that came tucked in a merchant's sleeve. A ladle of gravy from the good pot slipped to the woman who cleaned the floors that afternoon. A heel of cheese, hard as a sermon, shaved thin enough to feel generous. They also play defense. A complaint slides through the hatch and the answer is speed if the critic is kind, and patience if he is not. Patience sometimes means his pie cools on purpose, while the bench beside his gets their stew hot and quick and twice stirred. Pay is a patchwork. A server might receive 2 pennies a day, a meal, and a bed under the eaves where the smoke pools on cold nights. Tips stress the difference between hunger and comfort. A cook might be paid in coin, plus a barrel's worth of leftover drippings that becomes tomorrow's profit in their sister's kitchen. The ruffian gets coin and quiet favours. A boot mended, a tooth pulled by the barber, surgeon when he sets up in the corner, a word to the watch that the noise they heard last night resolved itself and doesn't require a fine. The keeper pays himself last, in the sense that the house eats every coin he doesn't hide from it. Roofs don't repair themselves. Casks don't roll uphill. A servant's illness means 2 more mouths find space at the staff table. Staff live like a second family formed of necessity and repetition. They defend one another in the room and in the world. A server slandered as loose by a man who didn't like her, no, will find 3 witnesses, cook, ruffian, keeper standing with her at the church court to tell the truth until the lie shrivels. A ruffian limps for a week and somehow the heaviest jugs migrate to the other server's tray without anyone saying it aloud. Apprenticeships happen here too. A clever boy who can add will be taught the tally. A shy girl with steady hands will learn the pour and, with it, the authority to say enough in a voice men hear. Danger comes with the job. Burns lace the cook's wrists like a map. The ruffian's knuckles swell twice a winter and once a summer. A server learns to pivot when a bench goes over, or the bruise blooms purple by morning. They endure because the house endures them back. After close, the staff meal is not a perk, it's a covenant. A bowl poured from the middle of the pot, not the bottom. A hunk of bread that didn't pass under a dozen hands. A cup that the keeper fills himself. Laughter here runs softer, and it's theirs. Stories from the floor get retold with the angles sharpened, the soldier's boast cut to size, the merchant's lie measured in inches. Plans get made. Who will fetch rushes? Who will bargain with the brewer? Who will walk the server home on the lane with the dark hedges? The law intersects with their lives in crooked ways. Servers drag men to the door before the watch arrives, because the fine falls on the house if the brawl is found inside. The kitchen learns to keep a clean bucket near the door, because an inspector once fined them for a mess visible from the street. The keeper keeps 2 purses, one for taxes, one for repairs, and swears he'll never confuse them, and then loans from one to the other the day a beam groans in a wind he doesn't trust. Their craft is invisible when done well, obvious only in its absence. A good night is one where you don't notice the server rerouting a quarrel with the simple act of delivering a round to the far end first, where you don't see the ruffian lift a mug out of a clenched fist and replace it with a cloak, where the stew tastes better than the ingredients deserved because the cook rescued it with a splash from a bottle no one else touches, where the keeper never raises his voice and still somehow closes the door at curfew, with the room smiling at him as if it were their idea to go. Treat them well, and the room treats you well back. The pour runs generous, the trencher is fresher. The tale about you that travels to the next town is kinder by a paragraph. Treat them badly, and the house becomes an education in consequences measured in teaspoons and timings. Medieval life does not give the staff power on paper. It gives it to them in practice at the hinge where hospitality becomes survival, where a public room must be made safe night after night by people whose names aren't carved on any seal. When dawn hints through the seams and the fire drops to coals, they clean, rushes raked and replaced, benches righted, mugs stacked to dry, casks checked, tallies matched, the shelf of collateral dusted like a reliquary. Then they sleep in, snatches some on pallets up under the roof, some in rooms nearby where the smell of smoke has soaked into the beams. They'll be back on their feet before the first cart wheels crack the frost, because a tavern is a lung for a town and lungs don't get holidays. And yet, even lungs evolve. This world of smoky beams and tally sticks will not stay as it is. New brews, new laws, new rooms with chimneys and glass will bend the trade into new shapes. Next, watch the tavern change its bones without losing its heartbeat. Time doesn't knock. It renovates. The medieval tavern doesn't vanish one morning like mist off a field. It shifts, creaks, and learns new tricks as centuries lean on it. If you stand long enough in the doorway, you can feel the bones rearranging, taste changing in the cup, smoke thinning in the rafters, rooms dividing like cells under a lens. The first big shove comes from a flower that tastes like a fence: hops. For much of the Middle Ages, ale is quick, cloudy, and fragile. Then brewers begin leaning hard into hopped beer, first patchy, then common, then expected. Hops don't just perfume, they preserve, turning a narrow window of drinkability into a corridor long enough for barrels to travel and ledgers to stabilize. Suddenly the neighborhood brew kettle isn't the only game. Specialized breweries bloom, run by people who can judge a boil by sound and a fermentation by smell from across the yard. The tavern becomes more of a cellar, less of a maker, and the keeper's handshake expands from the maltster down the lane to the brewery. 3 towns over that can promise consistency, tax stamps, and a cart that shows up when it says it will. Preservation changes the cellar. Architecture changes the lungs. The central hearth that once coughed smoke up through a hole gives way to chimneys you can point at and thank. Bricks stack into flues. Soot retreats into the throat of the house. With real chimneys you can build higher and smarter. Rooms subdivide private nooks for the moneyed, larger spaces for the crowd. A snug where a merchant signs papers without worrying that dice will bounce into his ink. Windows grow, not just in number but in ambition. Glass moves from a miracle to a luxury to something you see more often than not, especially in better houses. Light enters like a new patron. Curious, slightly rude, ultimately welcome. Hygiene stirs from principle into practice. The rushes that swallowed spills and secrets for months at a stretch lose their throne. Wooden floors you can scrub become normal in towns with rules and people willing to enforce them. Ordinances do some of the work, wash weekly. No waste where food is served, but taste does the rest. Customers fold clean floors into their definition of respectable. And keepers notice that the houses with less stink keep more regulars. A broom becomes as essential as a spigot. Food refuses to stay a lucky dip forever. As cities swell and inspectors multiply, tavern cookery sheds some of its chaos. You begin to see short, chalked menus instead of a shrug toward the pot. Consistency joins comfort on the plate. Meat still needs salt to outlast the road, but now there are rules about what can be sold and when. A cook's creativity doesn't disappear. It gets channeled today's fish on Fridays. Pies that lean less on mystery and more on pride. Stews with names instead of warnings. In a decent house you can order a dish that tastes like last week's memory on purpose. Even the cup modernizes. Communal bowls don't vanish overnight, but individual vessels begin to win the argument. Glass, once a status signal, trickles down the ladder. The first time you lift a clear beaker and see your drink instead of imagining it, you understand why. Clarity changes expectation. If you can see sediment, you can complain. If you can see color, you start to prefer some shades over others. The tavern's palette broadens. Pale beers that sparkle in noonlight. Darker ones that look like bread liquefied. Wines whose hues say something about where they slept. Potters adjust too, throwing mugs with lips that feel better, glazes that clean easier. Leather jacks keep hanging by the hearth, but they give up ground to materials that hold less history between rinses. Rules sharpen alongside glass. Licensing shifts from symbolic signboards to stamped permissions with fees attached and consequences that bite. The idea that anyone can sell drink from a room with a pole and a brush outside becomes quaint in cities that want fewer fires, quieter streets, and tax revenue that shows up when counted. A mid-16th century push in places like England formalizes what was winked at before no license. No ale nudging the trade from anyone brave enough toward anyone approved enough. With that approval comes more oversight. Opening hours that mean something, penalties that sting, inspectors who write as much as they taste. Specialization takes what used to be one room that did everything: drink, eat, sleep, scheme, and splits it into a family of houses with surnames. Alehouse. Beer first, food if you must. Tavern. Wine, warmer plates, customers with cleaner boots. Inn. The bed you wanted upstairs all along, now with walls between you and the snorer 2 pallets over. The lines blur in small places where one house has to be many things to survive, but the trend is clear. When a traveller asks where to go, the answer is no longer the tavern, but that alehouse if you're thirsty, this inn if you're weary, the other place if your purse is loud. With specialization comes class sorting, whether anyone admits it. The room that once forced a merchant to shout over a carter now offers a private parlour where coin buys quiet. Meanwhile, the alehouse down the lane leans into noise and comfort and the kind of prices that keep labourers loyal. The democratic mix of the medieval common room doesn't vanish. It just happens in fewer places and at certain hours. You can still find a bench where a sailor, a scribe, a smith, and a priest share a round. You just have to know which door still welcomes all 4 at once. A different challenge marches in with the 17th century in cities big enough to collect ideas like moths to a candle: coffee. The first time a man used to ale at noon meets a cup that sharpens rather than softens, the map of public life redraws a little. Coffeehouses, court merchants and news like taverns always did, but with a pitch that sounds like ambition in daylight ledgers open, gazettes unfurled, arguments argued with quills instead of fists. Taverns don't die. They double down on what they do best. Evening, warmth, memory, music, the consented blurring of edges. The city learns that it doesn't need 1/3 place. It can afford several, one for bargaining with numbers, another for bargaining with stories. Technology rides shotgun on these changes. Better malt kilns mean flavors you can depend on. Water drawn through new works in some towns tastes less like the past and more like nothing at all, which is the compliment water craves. Brewers measure more, guess less, and ship further. A tavern keeper becomes part logistics manager, choosing suppliers not just by handshake but by schedule and seal. Casks arrive with marks that matter. Shortages become the exception, not the background music. Inside, the choreography refines. Partitioned rooms let keepers curate their nights. A gaming room where noise is expected. A snug where talk trumps song. A great room where a fiddle can throw its voice without knocking over negotiations. The ruffian evolves into a porter at the inn and a bouncer at the busier houses, with more instruction than instinct in places where the law has opinions about how a patron should be removed. Servers trade leather jacks for trays and learn to balance plates shaped by potters who finally met someone who cared about handles. The kitchen borrows techniques from guild cooks and travelling books of receipts. A roast may still dry out, but now there's sauce practiced enough to save it. Prices get smarter without necessarily getting kinder. Printed handbills can list them, chalkboards can change them. Market price sneaks in as a phrase, and regulars learn to trust that fish costs more when the boats fought wind on the way in. Rounds still rule benches. Tabs still coil around tally and trust, but coin clinks more often as wages stabilize for some trades and urban cash economies thicken. That said, barter doesn't disappear where roads are dirt and winters are long. A hinge is still worth a jug in January. Through all this, the tavern keeps the core bargains it made in the smoky centuries. It continues to trade isolation for company, cold for heat, fear for laughter, ignorance for gossip, hunger for something that quiets the belly long enough to sleep. Toasts persist even with glass, and so do the little pauses where eyes meet before cups tilt. The instinct to mark life's ridges here, the harvest done, the child born, the parent buried, the guild charter signed, doesn't care whether the rafters are smoke black or freshly scrubbed. If you could time-lapse the space, you'd watch the furniture smooth out, the air clear, the cups clarify, the law grow teeth, the rooms proliferate, and the clientele sort themselves by coin and taste. But you would also see silhouettes that never change. Two heads close over a quiet argument, a table that erupts when the dice go rogue, a server who reads a room in one sweep and edits it with a tray, a keeper whose face is weather and welcome in equal parts. And here's the twist. The more the tavern modernizes, the more it throws its shadow forward. We inherit its words bar, taproom, public house, and its habits round buying, tabs, the sacredness of my seat. We build pubs with names that could hang on a medieval signboard and mean the same. Animals, tools, crowns, saints. We still look for rooms that can hold us together for an hour without asking us to be perfect. The medieval tavern doesn't vanish into museums. It condenses into instincts we still trust. So yes, the bones shift. The heartbeat doesn't. And as we raise a glass in a room with glass windows and a chimney that drafts like a dream, we're not leaving the old world behind so much as proving it learned to breathe cleaner. But to really see how deep those instincts run, compare their rituals to ours, how a regular claims a stool with nothing more than a glance, how a toast binds strangers, how a tab creates tiny bridges of trust. Next, let's hold the medieval mirror up to the modern pub and spot the echoes that survived the centuries almost unchanged. Hold a modern pub up to a medieval tavern like two panes of glass, and you'll see the same fingerprints smudged across both. We like to pretend we've reinvented the evening out with gleaming taps and touchscreen tills, but watch the rituals, listen to the phrases, map the flows of people through the room you're tracing old footsteps with new shoes. Start with the concept of the regular seat. In your local, someone owns the corner stool without a deed or a plaque, just the gravity of habit. Sit there by accident and you'll feel the temperature shift. That territorial dance isn't a quirk of modern crankiness. It's medieval muscle memory. Benches once doubled as social maps. The baker had a corner, the rivermen had a wall, the soldiers claimed the table near the door where their weapons waited on hooks. Fights broke out not because the beer was bad, though it often was, but because someone parked themselves where a dozen evenings had declared, silently, "This is Thomas's spot." Today we swap fists for pointed coughs and theatrical glances, but the rule is identical. The room remembers where you belong. Round buying is another fossil that still lives. You know the drill. One person covers the table, a second follows. The circle keeps its promise. Miss your turn, and the penalty isn't a fine. It's a haircut on your standing. That practice grew when coin was scarce and credit lived in the keeper's head. Rounds kept the ledger simpler and the group honest. The rhythm survives because it does more than move drinks, it binds. A round is a miniature social contract with foam on top. You can watch new friendships become official when a newcomer is invited into the rotation. You can watch old friendships wobble when someone repeatedly forgets their turn and the bench goes quiet in a way that says more than scolding would. Tabs? Medieval to the marrow. Your pub's point-of-sale system is a glowing descendant of the tally stick split, notched and immune to easy forgery. The same anxieties cluster around both. Will he pay? Does she tip? Is this a house that forgives a bad week if most weeks are good? The difference is material, not moral. Where the keeper once matched wood grain to wood grain under candlelight, today the bartender matches a name to a card and a signature to a face under a camera's indifferent eye. The underlying bargain trust up front, settlement later hasn't budged. Toasts clink across centuries too. The modern glass tap is the quiet echo of a louder medieval ritual. When you raise a cup and meet someone's eyes before you drink, you're participating in a safety check that outlived its danger. Communal bowls and whispered worries about poison turned into an etiquette that says, I see you. I mean you no harm. We are in this moment together. If you ever wondered why it feels off to drink after a toast without making eye contact, it's because you're skipping a step your great-great-greats treated as a survival tick. Look around your local on a busy night, and you'll find the tavern's third-place magic intact. Neither home nor work. A room where the edges between trades blur just enough for laughter to cross. The language is updated project managers where Reeves stood, delivery drivers where carters sat, musicians with amps instead of lutes, but the function holds. Information moves faster over a drink. Jobs find applicants. Apartments find renters. Relationships start with a sentence that would have sounded exactly the same 500 years ago. Is anyone sitting here? Entertainment hasn't changed so much as changed outfits. Dice and backgammon cede the floor to dartboards and pool tables. But the core thrill remains. Skill with luck's spice. A medieval crowd cheered when a storyteller nailed a punchline. A pub roars when a quiz team nails the tiebreaker. Minstrels traded strings for microphones and call the gig open mic night. The lewd dancing the church complained about? Call it a Friday crowd when the band leans into a beat that makes even shy feet consider the floor. Karaoke is the tavern ballad unashamed, half the room off-key, all of it earnest. A communal sound that forgives and forgets. Even the enforcement feels familiar, though the tools changed. That ruffian at the medieval door, the peace broker who knew when to lay a hand on a shoulder, is today's bouncer. A professional who moves a brewing storm outside with a word and a practiced stance. The licensing pole with a brush becomes a laminated city permit behind the bar, complete with renewal dates and an inspector's signature. Curfew bells turn into closing hours, enforced by zoning and fines. Last call is a modern way to dim candles with your voice. Price controls shifted into economies of display. Instead of conners in sticky breeches, we have itemized menus, poured measures, and laws that specify what a pint is down to stubborn milliliters. But the old game persists. Happy hour is a softer version of a sliding scale. The house bends price to shape crowd and cash flow. Festival nights still carry their own math. The difference is that the arithmetic is public now, chalked or printed where everyone can see. Medieval keepers adjusted prices with a glance at a purse. Modern houses adjust them with algorithms and specials. The intent to keep the room full and the ledger sane hasn't changed. Sanitation tells a parallel story. We ban smoking indoors and call it a public health victory. Medievals would have simply called it a room you can see across. Where rushes hid spills and sins, we have mops and inspection grades taped near the door that shame a lazy house before the internet does. Glassware gleams under bright bulbs, the better to make cloudy beer complainable. A clean bathroom is the new oiled paper window, a quiet signal that the room respects you. Technology layers over tradition without displacing it. Card readers and contactless taps mean no one needs to leave a belt knife as collateral, but coat checks still exist as a kind of voluntary pawn shop that runs on claim tickets instead of reputation. Security cameras replace the watchful corner table of old men who reported everything to the beadle. A POS system tracks rounds without splitting sticks. Yet bartenders still keep a mental ledger for the people who tip well, help when a rush hits, or slide their seat to make room at the rail without being asked. The social ecosystem remembers old roles. The publican is the keeper by a new name, still part diplomat, part accountant, part bather of fires. The bartender inherits the server's map of regular preferences. Who wants the first pour from a fresh keg? Who loves the end of cask richness? Who shouldn't be allowed just one more? The kitchen sends out comfort fast and surprises in between. Festivals surge and stretch staff thin the same way Saints' Days once did. A wake after a funeral still chooses a pub over silence at home because grief digests better when the room agrees to carry a little of it for you. Even our vices found modern synonyms. Watering down scandals become short pours caught on phone cameras. Cheating at dice becomes hand-eye miracles, with a dartboard witnessed by a friend who swears it wasn't luck. And the gentle revenge of the staff, once the bottom of the barrel pour for a rude mouth, turns into the kind of attention that is exactly as minimal as the law requires. Courtesy remains currency, rudeness remains taxed. If you want proof that the DNA carried forward, listen to what we call these places. Bar, the barrier between you and the casks. Tap room, where taps once literal spigots live. Public house, shortened to pub. These are medieval nouns that simply learn to dress modern. Signboards still hang with animals and crowns. You can stumble into the Red Lion in a dozen countries and be greeted by a mural that would have made sense to a 14th century carter. So when you step into your favourite pub, order your usual, and line up for the quiz, you're not inventing a new kind of evening, you're participating in one of the oldest. You're trusting strangers enough to share a room and a rhythm. You're paying with a blend of coin and courtesy. You're sitting where countless backs have rested, and countless stories have turned into laughter with the help of a cup and a chorus. We've improved the air, polished the glass, and clarified the rules. But the heartbeat is the same. Company over a drink in a room that promises for a few hours to make the world manageable. Of course, the medievals would remind you that not every house is equal. Then, as now, some doors open onto safety, and others onto trouble. A traveller with sense learned to read the signs: a clean threshold, a steady stable, a clientele that includes women and respectable tradesmen, a keeper with eyes like scales and hands like welcome. Your ancestors made checklists long before blogs did. Next, step back onto a muddy road with a purse on your belt, and learn how to choose a tavern that won't cost you your horse, your dignity, or your breath. Strap your purse tight and step back onto the muddy road. You've got a few miles before dusk, and a simple problem that has ended more trips than bad weather. Which door can you trust? In an age before star ratings and comment sections, travellers built checklists with their eyes, ears, and noses. The wisdom still works if you translate it into modern sense. Read the threshold, read the room, and read the keeper. Start with the outside. A well-kept sign tells you more than a pretty picture. Fresh paint, a hinge that doesn't scream, a pole that hasn't sagged into the lane, those details say the owner reinvests in the business. Mud happens. Care is a choice. Look at the sill and the stones around the door. If the threshold is swept and the puddle by the step is bridged with straw, you're probably walking into a place that thinks ahead. Tilted door, broken pane patched with a rag, suspicious stains on the wall beneath the window. Turn your boots elsewhere unless you've decided tonight is for adventure and not sleep. Scan the crowd moving in and out. A mix is your friend women in work aprons, tradesmen with tools, a clerk's cap, maybe a priest's sleeve. A door used only by men who refuse eye contact is a door that closes behind you harder than it opened. Watch for couples. If a carpenter brings his wife, he's betting the room won't shame him. That's a vote you can use. Dogs tell tales too. A house that feeds the yard hounds, scraps and lets them sleep by the kitchen door, usually runs warm. A house where beasts skulk and snap may be teaching them by example. Stables are the mirror of a tavern's soul. Even if you're on foot, take a detour to the yard. Are the stalls dry and gated? Is there a boy or groom with hands that look like they work? Do the horses inside look like they'll still be there in the morning? Blood on the floor, a lock on the feed room with no key in sight, suspicious ropes tied high, these are warnings. Horse thieving and traveller robbing dance together. If one is a sport in this yard, the other is a hobby. Now the entrance. Pause, not to be dramatic, but to let your eyes catch up. A decent house has light enough to see faces and floors. It doesn't have to sparkle, this isn't a bishop's hall, but if all you see is shadow and smoke, that might be a choice designed to hide things, designed to hurt you. Breathe in. Every tavern has a smell. The good ones stack it in the right order. Smoke, cooked food, ale. If rot or sourness jumps the queue, your belly may stage a protest later. Listen. The soundscape tells you what kind of night you're buying. A low thrum of talk, a burst of laughter, a clink and scrape. These are normal. Total silence when you step inside is not. A roar that drowns thought might be fun if you're with friends. Alone, it's a coin toss with bruises on the other side. The shapes of noise matter. Singing that finds a chorus is safer than shouting that multiplies without rhythm. Dice clatter is fine. Dice clatter followed by chairs scraping in a hurry means the money changed hands wrong. Your first contact is the server. A house that's learned how to last greets you without courting or ignoring you. If the server can spare a nod, a word, even a finger pointed toward an open bench, the room has enough staff to keep order. If you're invisible long enough to count to a slow 30, you're in a place that runs behind its own trouble. Ask a simple question. Have you any warm food left? The answer tells you more than the words. A quick yes with a short list means a kitchen under control. A shrug and a vague gesture toward the hearth means your supper will be luck and patience. Order a small ale first. It's cheaper, and it's the house's honesty in a cup. If it's fresh and honest, the rest of the menu probably is too. If it's thin as bathwater or sour when it shouldn't be, you've learnt enough to finish quickly and leave. Watch the pour. Measured, steady, no performance good. Eyes elsewhere, hands sloppy, spill disguised as generosity less good. If you spot an ale taster's seal or a licensing token near the bar, that's not a guarantee, but it's a sign the house has reason to behave. Read the keeper next. You want eyes that touch every table lightly, hands that rest but never settle, a jaw that doesn't clench until it needs to. A keeper who pretends not to see a rising quarrel will pretend not to see your trouble when it finds you. The good ones rearrange the room like chess pieces, with 3 sentences and a raised eyebrow. If the keeper takes your coin and your measure in the same glance, relax a notch. You've been added to the list of people to shepherd, not to shuck. Seating is strategy. Don't take the seat that announces you're a display. A table dead center is for locals or people who like to be bumped. A corner with a view of the door and your back to a wall is a traveler's friend. Don't sit with your purse pouch against the aisle side of the bench. Thieves learn quick from each other and quicker from your mistakes. If a stranger saves you a spot near a side door, decline politely. There are stories that begin that way. They shorten too quickly. Food tests a house's ethics. If you can, order what the room is already eating. A lone fancy dish on a poor night is a red flag wrapped in gravy. Watch where the ladle goes in the pot. Middle is safe. Top is stingy. Bottom is revenge. If your server sets a hand on your shoulder and says, "I'll bring you what's hot," say thanks, and keep your silver out a moment longer. Courtesy is currency, spend it first. If you must sleep on the premises, inspect your straw like a fussy cat. Shake it. You're listening for a sound that suggests it's been changed since the last saint's feast. Keep your boots as pillow and your cloak as blanket with one corner tied to your belt. A small knife under the pallet isn't paranoia, it's tradition. If you're with a partner, work in shifts for the first hour until the house settles. The worst nights start in the first hour, when latecomers stumble in and early drinkers stumble out. Traveling with gear? Count the same number in the morning. A house that locks a chest for you and gives you the key is earning your return. A house that tucks your sack behind the bar but out of sight is earning your watchful trust. A house that waves you toward a corner and says, "No one touches that," is earning your suspicion. Region matters. In England, big common rooms mean you can see most of your problems before they see you. In parts of France and Germany, small private rooms invite privacy and opportunity for those who like shadows. In Scandinavian towns, sleeping barns, separate from drink rooms, force you to cross open ground in the dark. Listen before you step. Harbour taverns anywhere are spice and danger. Money today, ships tomorrow, faces no one will miss by next week. If you must, drink, don't boast, and keep your back to timber. Mountain taverns are blunt and safer. Everyone knows everyone. and strangers glow in that knowledge like lanterns. Sometimes the right choice is to skip the tavern entirely. Monasteries keep travelers' houses where prayer buys you a bed with less noise and fewer stories. You'll be asked to behave and perhaps to rise early, but your purse will still be yours by dawn, and the bread will be honest. Merchants with letters of introduction can convert acquaintances into lodging. A guild brother in a strange town beats a cheap bed in a dangerous one every time. If none of that is in reach, make your own safety. A rope through your satchel handle and around your wrist. A stool wedged under the latch. A dog, if you've got one, who'll bark at the wrong kind of whisper. The smallest bark has saved more travellers than the stoutest lock. Finally, trust the thing that has outlived every rule, your sense of the room. If your shoulders won't uncover and your breath won't lengthen after 5 minutes, your body knows what your brain doesn't want to admit. Pay for the ale, thank the server, and walk. Pride is a poor blanket. On the other hand, if the first cup warms and the first joke lands and the first song makes your foot move without permission, you've found the kind of door every traveller hopes for, one that opens onto a room willing to hold you for a night without trying to own you. Make enough good choices and you'll gather stories instead of scars, memories instead of warnings. And as the centuries turn, those choices don't become obsolete, they become habit. We still judge rooms by light, sound, and welcome. We still read staff like weather and rearrange our seats like maps. We've polished the glass and scrubbed the floors, but the instinct to find the right door hasn't aged a day. Which brings us to the last lesson this smoky lineage offers: why the tavern by any name never quite leaves us. From tally sticks to tabs, from rushes to mops, from signboards to neon, the bones change. The need doesn't. In the final part, let's gather the threads. The language we inherited, the rituals we didn't know were ancient, and the simple human hunger that keeps drawing us back to a shared table, a shared cup, and a room that promises for a few hours to make the world manageable. Pull all the threads you've followed through the smoke, taste, noise, rules, games, coins, kindness, and you'll see a tapestry that looks suspiciously like your life with different costumes. The tavern is not a relic. It's a rehearsal space where ordinary people practice being a community. Change the lighting, swap the jugs for stemware or pint glasses, replace tally sticks with tabs that glow on a screen. What remains is the same choreography. Strangers arranged into neighbours by a room that knows how to hold them. Start with the language that won't die because it still works. Bar is just that plank, the boundary between thirst and supply, the stage where the keeper, publican, bartender, host turns ingredients into belonging. Taproom remembers the wooden spigots hammered into casks, even as chrome towers hiss and purr. Public house, shortened to pub, insists that this is a civic device, not a private parlour. Even the signs swinging outside lions, bears, crowns, ships are medieval billboards that weather refuse to retire. Walk far enough, and you'll still find a red lion that smells of chips and malt and a little history, and you'll realize you can read it fluently without ever learning Old French. Then hold up the rituals and notice how little dust they've gathered. The regular's seat persists because rooms need a spine, fixed points around which everything else can flex. The round-buying dance survives because generosity works better when it's structured and shareable. The toast lives because looking someone in the eye before you drink says, "We are safe together," in a language older than politics. The tab continues because trust up front makes the evening flow, and the settlement after gives tomorrow a reason to arrive. Even the staff's quiet justice, rewarding kindness with tiny abundance, taxing rudeness with invisible friction, keeps the moral physics of the room honest without needing a rulebook. The economics never stopped being human-scaled. Medieval barter hinges for jugs. Labour for stew becomes modern happy hour specials and staff meals that still taste like covenant. Collateral on the shelf transmutes into coat checks, card imprint tabs, and that mental ledger bartenders keep whether or not a point-of-sale system does. Charitable, poor sticks become pay-it-forward coffees, prepaid pints, a manager who quietly comps the wake because the family has already paid too much in another currency. The arithmetic is different. The ethics are not. Consider the staff, the craft hidden in plain sight. The keeper still works 3 jobs with one face: diplomat, accountant, lifeguard. The server's map of the room remains the real blueprint. She edits trouble by changing who gets served in what order, rescues someone's night with a glass of water and a joke, and chooses which story about you will walk down the street tomorrow. The ruffian of old becomes a bouncer who reads posture like weather, and moves storms outside before they find furniture. The cook still fights time and heat, turning what arrives into what comforts. None of this is glamorous. All of it is civilization. We also inherit the tavern's habit of marking the ridges of life with shared breath. Harvest banquet becomes graduation pint. Saints' Day singing becomes birthday chorus you can't opt out of. Post-burial mug becomes the reception where grief loosens its knot just enough to let sleep happen tonight. A guild charter, toasted in a snug, becomes a startup's first contract, celebrated at a high top. The room takes the hard edges of living and sands them with noise, salt and laughter until they fit in a human hand. The laws dance with the room, learn new steps without changing partners. Curfew bells turned into closing times, ale conners into inspectors, licensing poles into framed permits. The goal: keep fires down, fights outside, prices reasonable enough to be defensible stayed put. The best houses still honor the spirit instead of gaming the letter. They enforce enough with tenderness and no with clarity. So their nights end with the door closing on gratitude instead of sirens. Even the dangers teach continuity. There are still bad doors to choose. Harbour taverns in spirit if not in address. Rooms where trouble drinks first. The old checklist: light, smell, mix of patrons, stables, now parking lot, staff attention, keeper's eyes works as well as any review site. Your instincts are the oldest technology in the building. If your shoulders rise instead of drop, pay and go. If they drop, sit and stay. Pride is still a poor blanket. Welcome is still a warm one. And then there's the drink, which we pretend is about flavour until we admit it's about permission. Medieval small ale hydrated a town that didn't trust water. Your pint hydrates a conversation you wouldn't otherwise have. Hopped beer wandered far and standardized expectation. Modern brewing wandered wider and exploded it, turning choice into palate. Wine learned to travel, mead found niches, cider remembered orchards. None of that changes the basic function. Lift a cup, soften the day's edges, make space for the sentence you were too guarded to say an hour ago. So, where does that leave you, right now? Maybe at your favorite table beneath a framed print of a fox in a frock coat. Maybe on a bar stool with a view of the taps and the door. Maybe outside under a heater, sharing breath with strangers who are becoming something else. Wherever you are participating in one of humanity's most practiced arts, making a public room feel like a safe, temporary home. If you want a practical takeaway, it's simple and circular. Treat the room like a living thing. Learn its rhythms and help them along. Tip the staff who are saving you from versions of the night you don't want. Keep your promises in rounds and tabs. Refuse unkindness early. Notice who is sitting alone and decide what kind of neighbour you want to be. Don't take the seat that isn't yours until it becomes yours. After enough evenings where you earned it with presence rather than ownership. And if you want the sentimental takeaway, it's simpler still. When you raise your glass, you're borrowing every hand that raised one before you to solve the same puzzle: how to be less alone without becoming someone else's problem. The medieval tavern didn't invent that puzzle. It just offered a room where the answer feels attainable for a few unhurried hours. The night ends the way it began, with a door. On the inside, the keeper counts the last coins, wipes the plank, sets tomorrow's tallies in order. The staff laughs softly over a shared plate, then shoulders ache in silence. On the outside, you step into air that smells cleaner than it did when you came in, because rooms like this teach your nose what to miss. You walk home a little warmer, the world a little rounder, with a story you'll tell differently depending on who asks and how much day they have left. When you pass another signboard tomorrow, bear, crown, ship, bloom, you'll know it isn't just branding. It's a promise older than your city. Come inside. Be held by a ritual that has outlived plagues, fires, kings, and fashions. Sit where generations learn the grammar of sharing. Pay what you owe. Accept what you're given. Leave the room better than you found it. The rest is improv. And if, next week, you find yourself back under those beams, old or new, stained or painted, take the regular's seat if it's really yours. Buy your round when it's really time. Toast with your eyes, not just your glass. Pay your tab. Thank the staff. Listen when the storyteller starts, even if the story is only the person across from you trying to explain their day. That's the oldest entertainment in any tavern. And the reason the rooms keep filling: the world outside is large, sharp, and relentless. For a little while, in here, it's sized to the span of your hand around a cup.